Welcome, everybody, to this congressional forum between Jahana Hayes, Democratic candidate, and George Logan, Republican candidate for the 5th Congressional District. My name is Michael Bloom, and I am the Executive Director of the Jewish Federation Association of Connecticut. JFACT is an advocacy organization which lobbies city, state, and federal officials on issues of importance to the Jewish federations and their beneficiary agencies across Connecticut. Tonight's forum will focus on issues that are critical to the Jewish community and is sponsored by the Jewish Federation of Greater New Haven, Greater Hartford, and Western Connecticut. For those tuning in, we are recording this and will post this to our website, jfact.org. The Federation sponsoring this will also have the ability to post this as well. If you'd like to ask a question, please put it in the chat and we will try to get to it. Since this is a forum and not a debate, each candidate will have roughly 25 minutes with our community alone, for which we are very appreciative. Up first is Jahana Hayes. Moderating tonight's forum will be Deb Pullen, Government Affairs Chair for the Hartford Jewish Community Relations Council, and Gary Jones, CEO of the Jewish Federation of Western Connecticut.
So I guess we'll start with asking Ms. Hayes to give her opening statement, please.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here and for hosting this very important conversation. I hope you all had a peaceful and reflective holiday and are ready for what lies ahead. I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk to you, not only about the work that I've already done, but the work that continues to be done. There are so many issues that are important to all of our communities, and you have been such tremendous partners and help in all of this work. So I look forward to continuing the conversation, to really continuing to learn from your community, continuing to hear your feedback and incorporate it into my work. The thing that I can say I'm most grateful for from the Jewish Federation and your entire community is just the level of just humanitarian input that you provide. The idea that we all are connected to each other and we all have a responsibility for each other. That is something that I'm grateful to have learned from you as a community. I can tell you, when I entered Congress in 2018, I would have been very nervous to have this type of conversation. But tonight I looked forward to it because over the past 4 years, I've learned so much from all of my partners and friends in the Jewish community. I've had the opportunity to listen to you. I've had the opportunity to really begin to understand in a much deeper way how the things that are important to you are also important to me. So again, I look forward to this conversation tonight and welcome your questions.
Okay, I will have the first question, then Deb will follow.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that opening remark, and I know that we very much appreciate your efforts to reach out to our community. It means a lot to us as well. So let's start with the nonprofit security grant program. I'd like to hear your thoughts in terms of whether you are comfortable with continuing to increase the amount of funding for that program and why you think it's necessary.
Yes, well, I think you'll hear me say this a lot on my answers tonight. You know what I will do because you know what I've already done. I voted for the nonprofit security grant, but I also asked for the grant to be doubled because it is very important that we allow nonprofits to be able to coordinate and collaborate in order to provide safety and security. One of the things that I've seen over my time in Congress is that these funds have been depleted very quickly. So many organizations that have reached out and asked for assistance have not been able to get it because the funds have not been there. I sent a letter to ask that those funds be increased. We went from, I think it was about 180 million in 2021 to 250 million in 2022. But it's important that people are safe in their places of worship, in their schools, in their communities, all of these things that have been soft targets of violence. So the nonprofit securities grants is something that I have supported in the past, something that I will continue to support because I know how necessary it is. As a woman of faith, I know that when I walk into my church, I am not thinking about my security. I'm not thinking about anything but worship. And other people should not have to do that as well. We've seen synagogues come under attack. We've seen hate crimes. We've seen even defacing of private and religious properties. And this is something that we just cannot tolerate. I think a lot of the work that we've done in Congress, not only to improve partnerships, but collaboration and coordination between local law enforcement, to improve training of how to recognize and identify hate crimes and anti-Semitic behavior, but also to do things like provide security glass and reinforced doors so that people can worship in safety. Our schools is another place where this has to happen. So I've already voted for the nonprofit security grants. I've asked that those grants be doubled. I understand the importance of making sure those spaces are safe and secure. And it is something that I would continue to do when I'm reelected in Congress.
Thank you. And following up, since you mentioned schools, would you support additional resources for the U.S. Department of Education to help fight racism and anti-Semitism on college campuses?
Absolutely. This is something that I have done my entire time in Congress. I've supported legislation to diversify the education profession, to provide equity training in schools. As we see more and more of our school systems under attack and almost an erasure of our history, where there are groups that don't want anti-Semitic behavior to be taught. They don't want the Holocaust to be taught. I have asked for funding to increase these programs. I have asked that teachers and education professionals be trained on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have voted time and time again for anti-hate legislation, for funding to improve the teaching of the Holocaust, but also to make sure that the people that we put in front of our students are also prepared, to make sure that there are reporting structures, to make sure that there is an acknowledgement when these things happen, to identify and collect data and really specifically detail what entails a hate crime and make sure that they are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. These are things that I've already done in Congress. They're things that are very important to me. They're things that I recognize that as we move into the next Congress are even going to be even more critically important than they've been in the past, because there seems to be a national movement to pretend these things don't exist. I think that one of the things that I have learned from the Jewish community in particular is just this embracing of the diversity across your different cultures. You know, there are so many people that span the entire spectrum, and there really is, that is embraced. And I think that is something that we can learn as a country. I think that we cannot erase our history. It is very important that we are teaching that to young people so that when they go out into the world, they take that with them. It is very important that we call out racism and anti-Semitic behavior when we see it. And that has to be supported across all of our institutions. It has to be supported in the workplace. It has to be supported in housing, through anti-discrimination laws, everywhere. So I have been very committed to these things. I will remain committed. I will continue to ask for funding to support and resources to make sure that these things are happening so that we don't have these unfunded mandates. But this is something that is deeply personal to me. On the Committee of Education and Labor, I have fought for, when I think about this, I don't think about it as just discrimination against a religious or ethnic group. I fought to make sure that our LGBTQI plus young people don't face discrimination in schools. I fought to make sure that Title IX funding is secured and stabilized, because I recognize that if we allow discrimination in any group, it's only a matter of time before it penetrates and permeates institutions, before it is rampant in our society. So I have been consistent in my actions, in my efforts, in my votes to make sure that we are calling out discrimination when we see it and reforming our structures and our institutions to make sure that these things don't exist.
Thank you, Ms. Hayes. So turning to Israel relationship with the United States, the Jewish community has strongly advocated for the continuation of the Memorandum of Understanding issued during the Obama administration, providing Israel with annual security assistance and for ongoing support of the Iron Dome. Please tell us your perspectives on these issues, and would you be comfortable continuing to support the MOU and the ongoing funding of Iron Dome?
So I think this is something that, again, it's one of those areas where I just had the privilege of learning from the people within your community. I took a trip to Israel and had a chance to visit the Iron Dome and really got a deep understanding of just the proximity to civilians and society and the necessity for allowing Israel the ability to defend herself. I look forward to taking another, I took one trip and then COVID hit. I look forward to taking another trip. I've been invited for February because I just learned so much. I voted for $1 billion in funding for the Iron Dome. And then last year, when additional funding was requested, without hesitation, I voted for that. What I learned is that our partnership and our friendship with Israel is critical to the United States security, that making sure that we have strong missile defenses are critical. I also learned that we can do that and still provide the humanitarian assistance that is necessary on the ground. One does not cancel out the other. I've been thoughtful and intentional every time this came up for a vote, but I've been resolute that we have to stay committed to making sure that Israel can defend herself in this region. It is mutually beneficial to the United States and our partners in Israel. I have seen the last time this funding came up, it was a bipartisan vote. There were 9 people who voted against it. But I think as a caucus, this is somewhere, as a Congress, not even as a caucus, this is somewhere that most members agree upon. I have really taken the time to go and talk to the people who are extremely well versed on this. Some of my colleagues like Ted Deutsch and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who have really been able to just provide me with answers to the questions that I have, to really give me the contrast and help me to understand all of the things that we're doing in a multifaceted way, not only to protect the security of the region, but also to stabilize the people. This is something that I'm very excited about because it's opened up this world of knowledge and information that I look forward to just asking so many questions about, well, what does this mean and why is this important? And over time, I can tell you in the last 4 years, I have a true understanding and appreciation of why it is important. Having been there, having seen it, having seen how missiles were intersected before they hit communities and neighborhoods and schools, and just understanding why that is important. I've also seen how that technology can help people around the world. We heard from the Ukrainian president and how just these missile defense programs really could be deterrents in other regions. And I think that we have this memorandum of understanding in the United States-Israeli partnerships to thank for that. I think that we can expand upon these types of efforts and make sure that this is seen as a deterrent for other people around the world who would create malfeasance, that the United States stands with Israel. We are partners in the region. And even though it is a much smaller nation in a very hostile region, they are not alone. They have the support and the friendship of the United States of America.
Thank you. And we're going to stay in that area of the world and go to an audience question. What steps can or should Congress take to expand the Abraham Accords, which enhance and supplement Israel's efforts to achieve its long-sought peace with its neighbors?
I think that what we have to do is help Israel to be their own best partner. The United States can't be the ones to step in and take over any of these agreements or any of these negotiations. It has to be the will of the people of Israel with the support of the people of this country. I think that while we want to be strong partners, friends, and allies, we really have to refrain from stepping in and trying to take over in these efforts. And that's going to happen, not just through defense, but through economic partnerships, through humanitarian aid and efforts, through making sure that we acknowledge all the people in the region and just are there as a partner and assistance. I think that's one of the things that makes people very uncomfortable that the United States is going to come in and take over. I don't think that that is our role. I think our role is as in the area of being a supporting cast, providing those outside resources. Another thing that I saw when I was in Israel that really struck me was just how invested and involved the people there are in their democracy. So they have everything that it takes already in order to sustain their region, to weigh in, to be their own voices. When I was there and it was close to election day, and literally every single person was getting ready to go vote, getting ready to weigh in. So as we talk about the Abraham Accord or any other issues in that region, I think we have to take direction from the people of the region who have shown themselves and proven themselves to be incredibly capable of governing, of leading, of managing their own destiny.
Thank you. Have time for just a few more questions, so I'm going to go to a different area, even though we have a lot of good follow-up questions for that. As you know, support for refugees is a bedrock principle for the Jewish community. What are your expectations in terms of the number of refugees entering our country over the next 2 years? And are you concerned that American support for Ukrainian refugees may wane as the war continues?
So I voted in support of assistance for refugees. United States, we voted as a Congress and sent aid to Ukrainians. Last week in the continuing resolution, I voted for an additional support. I think it was $1 billion the first time. And then there was additional support. This was the only people who voted against that aid was Republicans. And I've heard over and over that there's this concern that United States is sending too much aid to Ukraine and we're not going to vote for additional supplemental funding. This funding wasn't just for defense. It was for humanitarian efforts. It was for relocating people. It was for food. It was for shelter. It was for all the things that you do when you are a world power in a global democracy. I would continue to vote for aid and assistance to the people of Ukraine, because while some may argue that that money can be spent at home, it is to all our benefit when we are helping our neighbors and partners around the world. Many of the things that we've seen with our economy, with the rising gas prices, with the rising cost of food, all of those things would be stabilized if Ukraine wasn't in the position that they were in right now. I voted to make sure that we allowed special visas for people who had helped in this region so that we can get them here safely. And I will continue to do that. I think that you cannot be a world power, a global force without recognizing that diplomacy is important, that global democracy is important, that we have a responsibility as the United States of America to not only help our allies in times of crisis, but also as they are trying to stabilize. I would be supportive of the efforts by Ukraine to join the United Nations and really have the support in that hostile and volatile region. I've seen some of my colleagues continue to praise Russian President Vladimir Putin and some of his actions. And I am so proud of members of Congress, of this Biden administration for calling that out and saying we absolutely do not stand with this authoritarian dictatorship that is running right now in Russia. So I would continue to support the people of Ukraine. I'm very happy that the election that was just taken to annex different regions in Ukraine, that it is being called for what it is, a sham, that the people of Ukraine did not vote for this, and we have a responsibility. I think that even outside of Ukraine, as we're talking about humanitarian efforts and assistance, there's been this increased rhetoric about who is welcome in the United States. This is a land of immigrants. This is a land where people have sought refuge. There is a lot of work that needs to be done to our immigration system, but that should not include shutting people out and closing people out. Generations of people have sought refuge in this country, and we've always been a welcoming beacon for them, and that should not end now. So outside of just what we need to do for the people of Ukraine, just refugees and asylum seekers in general. We have to reform our immigration system. We have to make sure that as people present themselves to the borders, to our borders, following the American laws as they are written out, that we have the agents, we have the authorities, that we have the efficiency and the effectiveness to process those applications quickly so that people and families have some sort of resolution. It is increasingly harmful and dangerous, the rhetoric surrounding immigrant communities and who is welcome here. It is increasingly dangerous and harmful when I hear from people who have immigrated to this country who think that, you know, it was good enough for me, but not for anyone else. We really have to work together to acknowledge the humanity in all people and make sure that the United States continues our long tradition of welcoming refugees and asylum seekers.
Thank you. If you are reelected, would you support additional funding for the Jabara Hire No Hate Act? And what other measures would you support to combat the rise of hate?
So yes, I would. I actually asked for more. I signed on with some colleagues to ask that that funding already be increased. I think one of the important things that that act does is it collects the data that we need to identify what hate crimes are, but also we can begin to put preventative measures in place. Last week, we voted for a policing bill that would provide resources and funding for racism and anti-bias training. I think as we begin to educate more people on what these crimes look like, we can begin to combat them. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I voted for anti-Asian sentiments against COVID-19, which was something that we saw a rise of across the country. So it pains me when I still hear my colleagues refer to the COVID-19 pandemic as the China virus. When those things, when you have elected officials who lead like this, it just gives permission for people in communities to do the same. And we've seen that over and over and over again. So collecting the data on these types of crimes, making sure that law enforcement personnel, that educators, that leaders in the communities understand what a hate crime is and are able to call it out when they see it, and that we have the resources to combat them, but also prosecuting these things to the fullest extent of the law. We've seen that over and over and over as we've seen the rise of gun violence, as we've seen, again, synagogues, as we've seen the embassy in New York I saw last week that was graffiti written on the outside of it. There has to be this collective voice where it doesn't matter where you fall on the political spectrum, that you can understand this is discrimination and we will not accept it, especially in our institutions, especially in our federal government, especially in our communities. And the only way to do that is to begin to collect the information, disaggregate the information, figure out where we need to put the resources and work our way out from there.
Thank you. One pretty straightforward question we know for you from your background, but we think it's worth noting for the community. Would you continue to fund Holocaust Survivor Act assistance?
Yes, absolutely. And I think now more than ever, we all have to fight to make sure that happens. There has been, there is an intentional attempt to erase histories. I think that as a teacher, I know that this is a flawed theory. I can tell you that it was uncomfortable for me to teach about the Holocaust to my students. It was uncomfortable for me to teach about slavery or the women's rights movement or some of the darkest parts of our history. But I can also tell you that I created a safe space for kids to ask questions. And when they left, they went into the world more informed on these topics. Introducing kids to this information and this experience does not divide communities. Actually, it does just the opposite. It brings them together because it helps us to understand and commit to making sure that these things never happen again. It is a dangerous path that we are going down with these attempts to ban books and erase history and experiences, because what it says to people is that your experiences don't matter, that the things that happen to you are not important. And quite frankly, I can tell you that with children, it does not divide them or make them angry. It brings them together because they have a different level of understanding and appreciation to why this is important. I've heard my students ask their classmates, well, why do you celebrate this holiday? Or what does that mean? Or can we talk about this a little bit more? You know, when we read things like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas or The Diary of Anne Frank, and just asking questions. We've had survivors come in and talk in our classroom, and I've seen children moved to tears, but then also taking that information and applying it to another group or another community because they understand how dangerous it is. I think that it is to our peril if we are not making sure that we are educating the next generation and arming them with the information that they need to understand when there is a rise of anti-Semitic behavior, when there is a rise of hate, when there is an attempt to erase history, past information. Children understand that, communities understand that. I was so fortunate to work in a diverse school with people from all backgrounds, from every stripe, and learn from them. And I think we all have to lock arms and make sure that that continues, and that our communities still have the benefit of that, because it is dangerous to not have it. I worry about where we go from here. I've seen an erosion of norms. I've seen people not respond in ways that they know are appropriate. We saw that after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. I saw my colleagues who would tell me privately that they knew this was wrong, go and vote in the opposite way. And this is a time where people have to speak up and speak out. And even if you're alone on those issues, you have to be the one to say, I will not allow this to happen. And we have to make sure that we are funding a Holocaust Survivors Act, make sure that we are providing resources for our schools, make sure that we are rooting anti-Semitic behavior out of our institutions. I've taken every vote that I have taken. Every vote has been in support of eliminating discrimination, especially in this area.
Thank you. So this is our last question for you, Ms. Hayes. Can you share with us what your top 2 or 3 policy priorities would be if you're reelected to Congress?
So when I'm reelected to Congress, I have lots of priorities, but one of the things that I know is going to depend on the outcome in the House is the next Farm Bill. I'm the chairwoman of the Nutrition Oversight Department Operations Subcommittee, and the Farm Bill is coming up. And my Republican colleagues have already said that any expansion of food security programs is their hard line, that it is not the government's role to feed families. I disagree. We are the United States of America, and we should be able to feed people. I was very excited to have helped secured $50 million for a White House conference on hunger, which was convened last week. And 7 of my bills were incorporated into this conference. Bills to close the meal gap, to expand programs for veterans and service people, to make sure that our elderly community have access to SNAP benefits, to make sure that WIC program is expanded. I believe that as a nation, that is something that we should all be committed to. And it is something I'm very excited to continue to work on in the next Farm Bill. One of the things that I learned again on my trip to Israel was many of the climate mitigation strategies that they have been incorporating in their ag programs for drought resistant crops, to make sure that they were using minimal amounts of water. These are all things that, now that the United States is serious about making investments in climate mitigation strategies, that we can partner and learn from each other. So I'm very excited to work on the next Farm Bill and make sure that we make an intentional effort in this country to end hunger and food insecurity. Another thing that I look for that is very important to me is just codifying women's reproductive health. This is something that has been, it's relevant, it's back in the news. People know that when the Supreme Court decision came out in June, that we can no longer depend on courts or administrations to protect women's health. I think people can trust where I stand on this issue because they know how I've already voted on this issue. I voted for the Women's Health Protection Act, which would simply codify the language of Roe. I don't think that there is any room for me as a congressperson, as a legislator in someone's healthcare decisions. It is between a woman and her doctor, and nothing about that has anything to do with me. And I think that we have to make this the law of the land because we've seen what happens when we're in that state of fragility. And I think finally, just continuing on the path of recovery. We have so many communities that were devastated by the COVID-19 pandemic, and we made intentional choices to allocate funding and vote on legislation, first of all, to stop people from dying. 1 million people had died. We wanted to stabilize people in their homes. We wanted to make sure that they had access to vaccines, make sure they didn't get evicted, make sure that small businesses were not shuttered and have to close their doors, or that nonprofits, first responders had the money and the resources that they needed to continue working. I think now we are moving in the recovery phase, and this funding was intentional in the way that it was appropriated so that there would be money for the rescue and then money set aside for the recovery so that communities could decide how that looked or what they needed it for. I'm very excited to continue to work with these communities to close these longstanding equity gaps that really contributed to the disparities in so many communities, that really we saw more deaths in the communities that were vulnerable and did not have protections. I want to make sure that we protect the work that we did in this Biden-Harris administration to lower the cost of prescription drugs, to have climate mitigation strategies, to continue with the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act so that we can have gun violence prevention legislation. Kevin McCarthy has rolled out an agenda that promises to roll all these things back, to promises to sunset Social Security. I'm going to continue to fight for all of these things because I believe that every person that I represent in every community has value, that they are all worth, they have dignity, and my role as a representative is to represent all of them. So when I rolled out my campaign this year, it was with the message of leaving no one behind, and I'm going to continue to do that in the next Congress, whether it is veterans, whether it is children, whether it is senior citizens, really working hard so that no person in the 5th District is left behind.
Thank you so much. We have a number of other questions that came to us, but we're not going to have time. We really do have to move on to our other candidate, but we're so appreciative of your time, and thank you very, very much for being with us. It means a lot to us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and please take care.
Thank you. And now we're going to welcome George Logan. Welcome, Mr. Logan, and thanks for joining us this evening. And we'd invite you to make some opening remarks.
Sure. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, I'm George Logan. I'm the Republican congressional candidate for the 5th District. I am a former state senator as well, served for 2 terms. I grew up in inner city New Haven. I attended Notre Dame High School in West Haven, Trinity College in Hartford, received an engineering degree, and I've worked at a water utility for the last 30 years. I have my lovely wife, Lisa, 2 children, my son Hunter, 23 years old, graduated from Emerson College, and my daughter Tracy is a senior at Iona College, now called Iona University. My parents immigrated to the United States from Guatemala in the 1960s. And my parents always taught me that hard work and perseverance was the best way for me to make it in America, in this society. And to me, making it didn't mean becoming a state senator or running for Congress. It just meant graduating from college, getting a job, and raising my own family. I decided to run for the state Senate back in 2016, and now for Congress, because I feel that the American dream is at a crisis point in terms of here in Connecticut, in terms of families being able to afford to put food on the table, pay for gas to get to work, find affordable housing. And I believe that, here in Connecticut, we're a state of millions of people. And I think we need different leadership here in Connecticut and also in Washington that's going to move our country in the right direction. I look forward to November 8th, thinking positively. Once I win this election, I will continue to work tirelessly for my community. I will continue to work tirelessly for all of the families and seniors and veterans and all the residents in the 5th Congressional District. I first announced my candidacy back in July of last year, and I've been working tirelessly to make sure that I get the message out to folks that, I want to go to Washington and to support the U.S. Constitution. I want to go to Washington to support free enterprise, equal opportunity, and I look forward to doing that.
Thank you again for being with us. We're very appreciative. We have a number of questions that we have prepared, and we will be looking forward to seeing a few questions from the audience as well, and we'll hopefully be able to squeeze a few of those in. But let me start with the nonprofit security grant program. This is something that has been instituted, as you know, over the last number of years to help non-for-profit organizations who are at risk for security problems to be able to sort of fortify their buildings. And just want to see your position on this. And we, as a Jewish community, are hoping that it continues to be funded and that there's even an increase in funding associated with the program. So what's your perspective on that?
I'm very supportive of the nonprofit security grant program. And when I'm elected to Congress, I will fully support it. I do believe that it needs to be funded at the appropriate levels. I am one who, I'm 53 years old. Since I graduated from college, I've been involved in a number of nonprofits. Currently a member of the board of the YMCA for BH Care. I am a Catholic, and my parish is very active in the community. I have been a board member in a local hospital, a nonprofit hospital, independent hospital. So I know the importance of security and safety, particularly to stave off any potential threats. So I would be very supportive, and I do believe that funding should be adequate to make sure that our nonprofits can make sure that everyone that utilizes their services feel safe and comfortable in those locations.
Thank you. Would you support additional resources for the U.S. Department of Education to help fight racism and anti-Semitism on college campuses?
Yes, absolutely. I believe that we have no room for racism of any kind, and certainly not anti-Semitism as well. I certainly believe that additional funding at the federal level could be very helpful, and I would be supportive of those efforts. We need to make sure, though, that it goes to directly helping those intended targets, students at our schools. But yes, I am absolutely supportive of that concept.
Thank you. So we as a Jewish community are strongly advocating for the continuation of the Memorandum of Understanding issued during the Obama administration, providing Israel with annual security assistance and for ongoing funding in support of Iron Dome. We'd like to get your perspective on whether you would support continuing the MOU and ongoing funding for Iron Dome.
Yes, in Congress, I will be very supportive of the MOU and also for funding for the Iron Dome. Israel is one of our strongest partners on the international scene. I think it's very important that we maintain strong relationships with Israel, and we do everything possible to help them remain sovereign, to help them remain safe and secure. I also believe that there is a vested interest in the United States as well for doing so. Israel plays a very big role in just maintaining order in the region, and working with their neighbors, I think, is incredibly important. And I think making sure that Israel is able to work from a position of strength, whether it's in terms of their security, and whether it's in terms of any negotiations with their neighbors. It's very important that we do everything that we can to help, one of our strongest and longtime partners, Israel and the United States. I believe that relationship must remain as strong as possible. And I would be unwavering in my support of Israel and in my support of keeping the country sovereign and safe.
Okay, bringing it back home a little bit, would you support domestic terrorism legislation if it's brought up again next congressional session?
Sure. Look, legislation is a broad term. I certainly am against any type of racism. I'm against any type of terrorist activity. But the question is, what is the definition of terrorist activity, particularly domestic terrorism? So I believe anyone that is looking to conduct a hate crime, to break the law, to discriminate based on race or gender or religion, I think that is wrong. So I am in concept supportive of the idea of helping to prevent domestic terrorism, but I must say I have to look at the details of the bill. There was a bill that went through the House recently that had all kinds of additional items in there that weren't, I believe, exactly related to the title of the bill. I will work as hard as I can to make sure that we stave off domestic terrorism, and I look forward to working as hard as possible to make that a reality.
Thank you. One of the things that's been very important for the Jewish community is the funding for Holocaust Survivor Act assistance. And we just want to get your perspective on whether or not you've had a chance to formulate an opinion as to whether or not you would continue to support that funding.
I will absolutely support funding for the Holocaust Survivors Act. I would actually make that, certainly would be one of my priorities, to make sure that there is no gap in that, and to make sure that Holocaust survivors are taken care of. I mean, we have a responsibility to make sure that the Holocaust survivors are able to live their lives in a peaceful manner, and that they're not burdened with the basic necessities of that here, particularly here in the United States.
Thank you. What do you think the next 2 years look like for the United States regarding refugees entering our country? And particularly, we're thinking of this now with relationship to Ukrainians, but also people who are coming to the U.S. seeking asylum from other places. And sort of related to that question, do you see support for Ukrainians waning the longer the war wages on over there?
Sure. Here in the United States, we accept more refugees and asylum seekers than any other country in the world. And I believe that we should continue to do so, especially for people that are fleeing countries and areas in turmoil, whether it's because of war or religious persecution. I certainly feel that our efforts in Ukraine are necessary and justified and important. Ukraine is a sovereign nation, and they deserve to be able to defend themselves. And I will support continued funding to help. I certainly have heard rumblings in Congress in terms of the amount of funding that's going to Ukraine and accounting in terms of how that money is spent. I do think that those things are important, but they should in no way, shape, or form slow down the aid that is required to go to Ukraine. Now, over time, I do think that this war will certainly drag on longer than anyone wants it to. But as we can see, the Ukrainian people are committed to protecting their country. The resources that we're sending and that NATO is sending has been very helpful and impactful. We just have to stop the Russian aggression, because if we allow them to prevail in Ukraine, it puts us all at risk, on the global scale. We cannot allow that to happen. And again, I would continue to support funding to help the Ukrainians defend themselves. And in terms of refugees and asylum seekers, I don't, again, this is a country at war, at turmoil, and in turmoil. And just as other NATO countries are doing, I think, we should be part of that mix as the most, practical way possible. I think the NATO countries are doing a good job in terms of receiving refugees and asylum seekers. And I think we are doing our part, as well, obviously, in terms of the funding that we're providing. That's not just for weapons, so that they can defend themselves, but there's also humanitarian aid as well, and medical assistance as well, those sorts of things. And it clearly has been very effective, and it's been a bipartisan effort in Congress, and I look forward to being a part of that, to continue that effort.
Thank you. On a related note, would you support the Afghan Adjustment Act, which expands eligibility for special immigrant visas to certain Afghan nationals?
Sure, absolutely. Look, what happened in Afghanistan in terms of how the pullout was deployed was terrible. We left many of our friends and partners, longtime partners, folks that have been working with the American government, some for years, some for literally decades. And I do believe that we owe that to them. But, we need to, obviously these folks need to be vetted. If they have helped our country and their country in terms of maintaining peace, we should absolutely do what we can to help them in terms of, again, their desire to become asylum seekers and to get to safety as quickly as possible, and to allow them to start their lives or continue their lives in a peaceful manner. We owe that to them.
Thank you. We're going to go to a question from the audience. Can you share your position on the Iran nuclear treaty?
Sure, absolutely. So again, as I stated earlier, Israel is one of our strongest partners in the global scene, and that needs to continue. I believe that I am, the only candidate for the 5th Congressional District that can say that I will support Israel unwaveringly in terms of allowing Iran to gain nuclear capabilities and potentially nuclear weapons. Now, remember, the Biden-Harris administration, prior to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they were working on allowing Israel to obtain nuclear capabilities, and that all stopped, came to a screeching halt once Russia invaded Ukraine. I was in Congress at that time. I would not have been at all supportive of that. The current regime in Iran is very dangerous, certainly to the sovereignty of Israel, but to the regional peace. And we know that the current regime in Iran is funding and assisting terrorist activities throughout the Middle East and beyond. And so I think it's important that we do not allow Iran, under the current regime, to obtain any nuclear capabilities.
Thank you. Another question from the group is, what steps can Congress take to expand the Abraham Accords, which enhance and supplement Israel's efforts to achieve its long-sought peace with its neighbors?
Yes, I think I mentioned earlier that it is important that, in my opinion, that Israel, as it has been, does everything it can, whether it's Egypt or the Palestinians, to work on peace. But Israel, I believe, must continue to do so from a position of strength. That is very important. And the Israeli government knows best how to do that. I am absolutely supportive of their efforts. I believe the Israeli government should continue to lead that effort, and that the United States should provide assistance in any way that Israel feels is appropriate. But yes, I think that's very important for any nation, right, to have peaceful relations with their neighbors. And certainly, just given the mix in the Middle East, and as I mentioned earlier, the efforts by Iran and even Russia to just build chaos in the area, I think makes it a very difficult charge for the Israeli government. I think they're doing everything they can to work with their neighbors and to work towards peace. Well, but again, I do agree they must continue to do it from a position of strength, and to make sure that they keep in mind the safety and the sovereignty of their nation while they're doing that.
Thank you. If you're elected, would you support additional funding for the Jabara Hire No Hate Act? And are there any other measures that you would support to combat the rise in hate incidents?
Sure. I mean, I certainly think that as a Congress, as a nation, we need to lead by example. I think it's important that we direct our resources as appropriate, whether it's in terms of education, whether it's in terms of just making sure that any bad elements intended on utilizing hate to perform dangerous and violent acts against peaceful people. I think we should use everything we can in our power to combat that here domestically, and also to help our foreign friends as well do the same. But yes, that's extremely important to me as well. It's something that people in our nation need to feel safe and secure. And I think I'm a proponent of a smaller government, not bigger government. I do believe that a vibrant, healthy economy would be helpful in terms of making sure that we as a nation have the resources to do those things that we want to do to help keep our nation safe, and to make sure that we do what is our responsibility within the international community as well, through organizations like NATO.
Thank you. Although congressional support for Israel has been strong and bipartisan, we are concerned that without attention, that support could over time become less bipartisan. What can Congress and what can you do to help promote ongoing, continued bipartisan support for Israel?
Sure. Thinking positively, once I'm elected and a member of Congress, I think it's just important that our elected leaders make sure that they keep Israel and understand that it's one of our priorities. And, I will do my best to work with my colleagues and try to make sure that I help to inform and keep Israel a priority, and especially in terms of the understanding of the importance of Israel to really the security of our own country here as well. So as a member of Congress, I think it will be my role to make sure that I convey that to my colleagues. I convey that on the House floor when related bills are presented, and I will be a vocal supporter of Israel. I'll be a vocal supporter of the Israeli and Jewish community here in the United States, and I look forward to that. Again, I have a track record and a history of working with the Jewish community, here in Connecticut. I even Michael Bloom even talked me into, for example, going on one of these multi-faith tours to Alabama, for example, to go to some of the areas that were worst hit during the civil rights era. We had folks from the Jewish faith, the Catholic faith, other Christian faiths as well, all experiencing these historical locations together. Those are the types of things that we need to do. We need to lead by example. And that was a bipartisan trip. We had a fellow senator, Democrat, come along on that trip as well. Those are the kinds of things that we need to do. We need to just make sure that as we are doing our work in Congress, we understand who our friends are, we understand what their priorities are, and we make sure that the actions that we take here in Congress is number one, helpful and beneficial to the citizens of the United States of America, and also to make sure that we keep our relationships with our allies strong, because on the international scene, it is a team effort, and we need to make sure that we our friends stay healthy, safe, and strong.
Great. So we are at our last question for you, and this is your opportunity to share with us what your top 2 or 3 priorities would be if you are elected to represent the 5th Congressional District in Congress.
Sure. So my top 3 priorities are: one, inflation. I believe the current Biden-Harris administration, with their excessive spending packages, has led to the inflation that we're experiencing now. And they're still continuing with that excessive spending. I want to make sure that when I go to Washington, that I help to provide some better checks and balances. For example, when we talk about inflation, and let's look at things like whether it's groceries, whether it's other services, how about the energy prices, gas prices? When the Biden administration decided to cut off the XL pipeline and decided to move away from American energy independence for gas and oil. Well, guess what? Now we're dependent on countries like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and China. And for example, in the recent news, Saudi Arabia decided to cut production, right, out of our control. So now gas prices are going to spike again, as I predicted a month ago. So don't get too excited about the lowering of gas prices. We still have not achieved, we don't have energy independence. And until we achieve energy independence, we will not have the control in our hands to control our energy costs, gas and oil. So in addition to that, I think that it is our responsibility to make sure that we are energy independent as we work towards reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. You first have to be energy independent, then you work on your long-term plan to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. You can't do it the other way around.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you, Ms. Hayes and Mr. Logan, for joining us and sharing your thoughts with our community. Thank you to the 3 co-sponsors, Federation co-sponsors, Greater Hartford, Greater New Haven, and Western Connecticut. To let everyone know, we have 3 more forums coming up on October 19th and 23rd. 3 more congressional forums, so please join us. And with that, have a happy and healthy, sweet new year. Take care, everyone.